The street market pulsed with life, voices haggling, vendors chanting, the scent of roasted corn mingling with exhaust fumes. It was a typical Lagos afternoon, chaotic and hot, until the roar of a luxury engine silenced the noise like a needle. Scratching across vinyl, heads turned. A sleek midnight black Maybach pulled up beside the crowded curb like it didn't belong, because it didn't. Doors swung open with practiced grace, and out stepped Jordan Adewale, 32, billionaire, CEO of one of Africa's fastest-growing fintech empires. Tall, sharp-jawed, and draped in designer everything, he looked more runway than roadside. A team of assistants fluttered around him like anxious birds. Cameras clicked. Fans screamed. Security parted the crowd like the Red Sea. Jordan barely noticed he was used to this, the spectacle, the awe. It bored him, but just as he prepared to move towards the press venue waiting a few streets away, something shifted. His eyes landed on her. A young woman in a faded tee, jeans rolled at the ankles, balancing a wooden tray of bananas on her head with effortless grace. She didn't even glance his way, not when his car arrived, not when the crowd buzzed. Teniola Bakar stood firm in the madness, arranging her fruit with quiet, practiced rhythm. Jordan paused. "Double quotes, sir, we need to move," one of his bodyguards said, low and urgent. Jordan didn't answer. Instead, he stepped off the sidewalk and walked toward the girl with the bananas. People gasped, phones tilted in his direction. His assistants stammered. But Jordan kept walking until he stood right in front of her. "How much for your entire tray?" he asked, flashing the kind of smile that usually got him anything he wanted, without missing a beat. Tenny looked him dead in the eye. "Same price. I gave your driver yesterday. No special price for suits." The crowd erupted in laughter. Jordan blinked. He hadn't expected that. He was used to awe, maybe flirtation, never indifference, and certainly not defiance. His smile faltered, just slightly, then curved back, tighter this time. He reached into his wallet and pulled out a thick wad of naira. "I'll take it," he said, handing it to her without counting. She handed him the tray, unimpressed. Then, without ceremony, he slipped a card from his pocket. Matte black, minimalist, embossed with only his name and number, and placed it gently on the edge of her wooden stand. "In case you ever want to talk about something bigger than bananas." She didn't answer. He turned, stepped back into the Maybach, and vanished in a blur of tinted windows and tail lights. Tenny stared at the card for a long beat, then picked it up and walked to the nearest open gutter. With a flick of her wrist, she dropped it in, and just like that, the richest man in Lagos was forgotten, or so it seemed. Jordan Adewale had always known wealth, the kind that insulates, isolates, and impresses. Born into a dynasty of old Lagos. Money, he was raised in gated mansions with imported nannies, foreign tutors, and a calendar filled with award galas instead of family dinners. His father, a banking titan, and his mother, a diplomatic force in her own right, viewed parenting as a scheduled inconvenience. Their legacy mattered more than love, and Jordan learned early that affection was conditional, earned, never freely given. By the time he turned 16, he had a trust fund larger than some national budgets, but not a single person he could call at midnight and cry to. Over time, he stopped needing that kind of connection. Women, for him, became either strategic alliances or beautiful distractions, always temporary, never essential. He rose fast in the tech world, carving out his empire by 30, building sleek apps and frictionless payment systems that disrupted banking across Africa. The media dubbed him the tech pharaoh, a cold genius with a golden touch. But now, with plans to take his company global, his board had started pushing back. They wanted more than results. They wanted a wholesome image, a man the world could root for. Settle down, they said. Find a wife, clean up the brand. Jordan didn't argue, not out loud, but he had no intention of being handled like a product. Tiniola Bakari lived in a different Lagos, one of blistering sun, cracked pavement, and hands hardened by work. She was 25, but often mistaken for older. Hardship aged people like her faster. Her father had died when she was 10, and her mother, a seamstress with a warm laugh and tired eyes, raised her and her younger brother, Kola, alone. Tenny had been a sharp student, always at the top of her class, until life pulled her out of school in SS2 when Kola fell sick. His condition, poorly diagnosed and poorly managed, demanded time, money, and a strength most people her age didn't possess. She became the family's provider, waking before dawn to buy bananas in bulk, slicing them just right, and heading to the roadside to sell from sunrise to nightfall. She dreamed quietly, mostly when she was too tired to fight the thoughts, of owning a small grocery store, maybe with a cold drinks section and enough to send Kola back to school. But pride kept her grounded. She accepted help from no one, least of all men in cars with tinted windows and empty promises. Men like that didn't see girls like her, not as people anyway, just as charity cases or conquests. So when Jordan Adwell sent his assistant, Raymond, to her stall the next day with a polite offer to purchase the entire tray again, she didn't even look up. "Tell your ogre to buy data," she muttered. The next day, when Raymond returned with flowers tucked into the banana order, she flung a ripe one straight at the Maybach's windshield and yelled, "I dey sell fruit, not myself." Word spread, and people started gathering near her stall just to watch. It became a daily performance, the billionaire's emissary arriving with increasing desperation, and Tenny standing her ground with all the fire of someone who had nothing to lose. But Jordan wasn't angry. He was fascinated. It had started as a simple curiosity, a woman immune to his charm, untouched by his money. But over the days, it turned into something more complicated. He found himself cancelling meetings, rescheduling interviews, and driving past her corner just to catch a glimpse. There was something about her, her stubbornness, her quiet strength that disrupted the rhythm of his world in a way he couldn't explain. She didn't want anything from him, and somehow that made him want her even more. Meanwhile, back in her one-room apartment, Tenny was losing sleep. Kola had grown weaker, coughing through the night, his small body curled into hers for warmth. She took him to the local clinic, but they barely glanced at him before mentioning the bill. It was more than she made in 2 months, and the nurse didn't hide the condescension in her tone. "Maybe ask that big man who likes to come around," she suggested with a smirk. Tenny left in silence, jaw clenched. The humiliation burned, deeper than the helplessness. She would not beg, not from a man who thought he could buy her tray, her pride, and now her desperation. But desperation, like water, finds its cracks. And as Kola's fever rose and her savings dwindled, Tenny would soon face a choice that pride alone couldn't solve. The sun hung low over Lagos, casting a soft golden haze on the usual chaos of the street market. It was a slower afternoon, the crowd thinner, the noise muted. Tenny sat behind her tray, fanning herself with a folded newspaper, trying to stay awake between customers. Then she saw him, not in a convoy, not flanked by assistants or bodyguards, but walking alone. Jordan, Adewell, in jeans and a plain polo. No designer logos, no watch that screamed its worth. He didn't approach with his usual swagger. He simply nodded at her, then sat down quietly on the cement bench beside her stall, like any other tired man seeking shade. For a few moments, neither of them spoke. He watched the street. She watched him, suspicious but curious. "You're brave," he said finally, not looking at her. "Telling off a man everyone else bows to." Tenny raised an eyebrow. "You say that like it's impressive." "I just don't have time for nonsense," he chuckled softly. There was no mockery in it. For the first time, their conversation didn't feel like a game of power. There was no banter, no flirting, no attempt to impress or provoke. They talked, really talked, about Lagos traffic, about her bananas, about how he hated being called the tech pharaoh. At some point, she mentioned her brother, only briefly, saying he'd been a bit down with a fever, her voice too casual to be honest. Jordan didn't push, he just listened. And when he finally stood to leave, he didn't offer money, no card, no wink, just a quiet, "Take care, Tenny." Days passed. The encounter lingered in her mind longer than she liked to admit. Then one night, it all collapsed. Kolar's fever spiked dangerously. His breathing turned shallow. Panicked and trembling, Tenny wrapped him in a threadbare shawl and raced across town to the nearest hospital. The waiting room was bright, sterile, and filled with indifference. The nurse barely glanced at her as she explained through tears. Then came the demand. 450,000, immediate deposit, or no admission. Tenny begged, pleaded, offered to pay in installments. The nurse shrugged. Rules were rules. She sank to the tiled floor, holding Kolar against her chest, sobbing so hard her shoulders shook. She didn't even hear the doctor approach, not until he said, "Madam, someone's covered the bill." She looked up, stunned. "Who?" The doctor simply said, "A sponsor. You're cleared." "We'll take him now." They whisked Kolar away. But Tenny's stomach twisted with a sick, certain knowing. There was only one person in her world who had both the money and the motive. She found him the next day, outside his corporate tower, not hiding, not avoiding her. He looked surprised to see her, but not guilty. Before he could speak, she launched into him. "I didn't ask for your charity," she said, voice low and shaking. "I didn't want to be bought. I told you that from the start." Jordan didn't defend himself. He didn't deny it or explain it away. He just stood there, his face unreadable, and after a beat, he simply nodded once and walked past her, back into the building. Tenny stood frozen, her anger burning into something more complicated, because the truth was, she was grateful, but she also felt small. Seen in a way she didn't want to be, vulnerable, helpless. And yet, something shifted. She started noticing him differently. Not as the man in the Maybach, but the man who had sat beside her in silence, who had listened, who hadn't gloated when he helped. And Jordan, he changed too. He stopped sending Raymond. He stopped the flashy gifts, the symbolic gestures. He still came around, but now he came with nothing but his presence, and sometimes bread or oranges for her and Kolar. He asked about her dreams, not just her struggles. He started talking less about himself and more about his past, the boy he used to be before the world crowned him. Whatever had been broken between them didn't stay broken. It became something else, fragile, unspoken, but real, something neither of them knew how to name. The change in Jordan was slow, but unmistakable. Where once he arrived with spectacle, now he came quietly, often on foot or on the back of a modest bike. He sat beside Tenny's stall without guards, without designers, without ego. He'd tear open foil sewer packs with his bare hands, lick pepper sauce off his fingers, laugh openly at Cola's corny jokes, and ask real questions, not about business, but about dreams. Her dreams, his own. The boy he had buried beneath boardrooms and billion-dollar deals began to resurface, and he found himself smiling more, sleeping better, wanting less of the cold marble life he'd built. With Tenny, there were no transactions, no performance, just breath, sweat, truth. He watched her slice bananas with practiced grace, argue with her favorite roasted groundnut vendor, and manage her tiny corner of the world with dignity. She had a kind of richness that no amount of money could fabricate, but the world he came from didn't stay quiet for long. One morning, his mother, Ephema Adwile, appeared at his penthouse, unannounced, her perfume arriving 3 seconds before. She did, dressed in imported silk. Her expression was carved from stone. She'd heard from friends, from the internet, from her social circles that never slept. A banana seller, Jordan. "In Mushin, this is who you want beside you," she said, her tone venom dipped in velvet. "Do you have any idea what this looks like?" "It looks real," he replied quietly. "To you, maybe. But to the world, it's a PR disaster. You're on the verge of taking your company global. You want to lose billions because of a roadside affair." The board echoed the same sentiments a few days later, veiled behind strategy and numbers. But the message was clear. Your image is your currency, and right now, you're hemorrhaging value. The whispers turned to headlines. One blog leaked grainy photos of him buying Boli with Tenny. Another caught him walking hand in hand with her near her stall. The headline screamed, "Tech billionaire in banana love affair. Is this our Nigerian? Royalty, asterisk." Tenny noticed it immediately. Her usual customers started avoiding her stall. Market women whispered behind her back. The nearby fruit seller, once friendly, now refused to share shade. And worse, Cola came home from school one day, silent, his backpack dusty from being shoved. "They called me banana bastard," he said softly, eyes downcast. Tenny's heart broke when she saw 2 unfamiliar men parked across from her stall for the 3rd day in a row. Pretending to be casual but clearly watching, she'd had enough. She stormed into Jordan's office, past reception, past his assistant, and found him in a meeting. He dismissed the others quickly, but before the door even closed, she was already speaking. "I didn't ask for this world, Jordan," she said, eyes glistening. "I was happy, quiet, invisible. You dragged me into this mess, and now my brother is being bullied and I can't even sell fruit in peace. Is this what your love looks like?" Jordan stood, the weight of her words crashing over him. He reached for her hand, but she pulled away. "I'm not angry because I'm ashamed of you," she continued. "I'm angry because you didn't think about what your world would do to mine." He swore then to protect her, to choose her over the board, over the press, over the noise. And for a moment she believed him, but the storm kept coming. Behind closed doors, plans were being made. His mother, relentless in her pursuit of image control, had already started negotiations with Adana, the striking Harvard-educated daughter of a rival tech mogul. It was a match made for headlines, smart, elegant, powerful, and crucially strategic. A merger disguised as a marriage. When Jordan found out the press conference had already been scheduled, his board had approved the message. If Amar had already leaked whispers to society blogs to build momentum, Jordan was expected to appear, smile, and announce a fairy tale engagement that would unite to fintech empires, and bury his scandal with a fruit seller in the dust. He sat in his office that night, phone in hand, staring at a photo of Tenny and Cola he'd secretly snapped one evening. They were laughing, Tenny with her head thrown back, Cola mid-bite into a banana, both unaware of being watched. It was the happiest he'd ever seen them. He knew what was expected. He knew what he stood to lose. But for the first time in his carefully controlled life, he didn't know what he was willing to sacrifice. The room pulsed with anticipation, a sea of flashing cameras and curated applause. The conference hall gleamed with polished chrome and LED screens that looped images of Jordan Adewale, the tech giant, the visionary, the soon-to-be groom. Beside him stood Adana, statuesque and camera-ready, dressed in an elegant gown that shimmered beneath the lights. Her smile was flawless, rehearsed, hollow. In the front row, Ifema Adewale beamed like a queen, a coronation. Her pride not in her son's happiness, but in the spectacle, the control. The PR chief took the podium, voice smooth, calculated. Ladies and gentlemen, we are gathered here today to celebrate not just a union, but a vision. Two empires merging, two legacies aligning. But Jordan wasn't listening. His heart was pounding like a war drum, sweat forming beneath the collar of his custom-tailored suit. Every instinct he had been trained to follow, protect the brand. Follow the plan, keep the room happy, screamed at him to play along. Smile, say the lines, secure the IPO. Instead, he stepped forward, reached for the mic, and cut the speech short. The PR chief faltered. The room fell silent. Cameras adjusted, red lights blinking. Jordan cleared his throat, looked out at the sea of expectant, greedy eyes, and said, "I'm not marrying Adana." Gasps scattered like fireworks. Murmurs rippled across the hall. "I know what you all want. A pretty story. A perfect couple. A billionaire merger dressed as a romance. But I'm not here to sell a lie. I've spent my whole life building things I thought mattered. Numbers, walls, images. But the only person who's ever told me the truth, who looked me in the face and saw a man, not a name, sells bananas in Oshodi. Her name is Tiniola Bakari, and she's worth more than every one of you in this room combined." The silence shattered. Chaos erupted. Reporters jumped from their seats. Microphones extended. Flashes blinding. Shouts. Questions. Shock. Jordan didn't wait for the fallout. He dropped the mic onto the podium with a sharp clang and walked out, past the stunned faces, past his mother's frozen expression, past Adana's tight, embarrassed smile cracking at the edges. He didn't stop until he was in his car, the engine growling beneath him. Tires screeched as he sped through the heart of Lagos, cutting through traffic, like a man possessed. The only destination in his mind was Tenny. But when he reached her corner in Oshodi, the stall was gone. The familiar tray, the faded umbrella, the bench where they'd first talked. All of it empty. He stepped out, eyes scanning the street, breath tight. The space looked smaller now, quieter. A piece of his world missing, gone. Weeks passed. The headlines faded, as all scandals do, replaced by fresher gossip and louder drama. But Tenny didn't wait for the world to quiet down. She used the noise as fuel, flipping it into momentum. With the sudden surge of unwanted attention came a strange opportunity. A women's cope reached out, offering support and a much. She took it, left the old market and its whispers behind. Set up in a new location across town, cleaner and more stable. No longer a lone banana hawker, she built something better, a modest but promising fruit supply venture, connecting local farmers to small vendors like her. She had business cards now, a basic website, a small cooler truck with peeling paint but real potential. She did it quietly, with the same grit and pride she'd always carried. No headlines, no charity, just her. So when Jordan finally found her hair tied back, negotiating with a supplier in the back of her stall, he didn't come dressed like a billionaire. No Maybach, no sunglasses or entourage, just Jordan, plain jeans, dust on his shoes, hope. In his eyes, she saw him before he spoke, didn't flinch, didn't smile either, just raised an eyebrow, waiting. "I'm not here to apologize with flowers or gifts," he said, voice steady. "I came because I owe you something real." She crossed her arms. "You owe me nothing. I told you I didn't want saving." "I know," he said, nodding, "and that's why I'm not offering it. I want to invest in this, in you, on your terms, no conditions, no headlines, just ... support." Tenny laughed, sharp and clear. Jordan Adewell, investor in Fruit & Co. Imagine the blogs. He smiled back, but there was something different in his gaze now. No arrogance, no performance, just sincerity. "You're not my project, Tenny," he said softly. "You never were, but maybe we could be partners. Not in business, not in ownership, just ... in this life thing, together." Tenny didn't answer right away. She looked at him for a long moment, the noise of the market buzzing faintly behind her. He wasn't asking to rescue her. He wasn't even asking her to love him back. He was just showing up finally, without needing to be anyone but himself. Her expression didn't change, but her eyes softened. She didn't say yes, but she didn't say no. 6 months later, the air was warm with celebration, not spectacle. Under a canopy of string lights in a small garden venue tucked behind a quiet compound in Surilla, Tenny's soft launch felt more like a family gathering than a corporate event. Her fruit business, Tenny's Fruit and Soul, had grown faster than she imagined, now supplying fresh produce to several Lagos offices. With a waiting list of vendors hoping to work with her, guests milled around tables topped with colorful fruit displays and local treats. Cola darted between them, proudly offering bananas in branded packaging, his grin brighter than the Lagos sun. In a quiet corner, Tenny stood watching, her eyes settled. On Jordan's sleeves rolled up, a towel slung over his shoulder, laughing as he poured drinks and wiped sweat from his brow. He looked nothing like the man who once descended on Oshodi in a Maybach, and everything like the man she now knew. Present, grounded, real . She walked over, arms folded with a smirk. "This is the first time you've ever worked for bananas," she teased. Jordan looked up, grinning as he handed her a cup. "I'd work for them forever, if it means working with you." She laughed, shaking her head. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The music played softly in the background, mingling with laughter and the scent of fresh fruit. Then, without ceremony, Tenny slipped her hand into his . No fanfare, no cameras, just peace.